Nowadays, it can often be hard to find a movie which does not have its inspiration from a literary source. Many great cinematic stories are essentially adaptations, meaning the attempt to successfully transport a narrative and its characters from one medium into another. With Sherlock Holmes being one of the most frequently adapted literary characters to date, there have been many different kinds of stories about the great detective, some of which come straight from Doyle's original work, and some that are unique takes on Sherlock Holmes' adventures, though at times they might seem a little bizarre. When someone decides to adapt more than one of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's detective stories, one inevitably stumbles over a story known as A Scandal in Bohemia, and this is where Doyle's most famous female character enters the scene. Irene Adler has become not only the most popular woman from the original canon, but she has also very often been utilized in various adaptations by either featuring personally or in the form of another character who is clearly inspired by her. What many adaptations have decided to do is to make the character of Irene Adler a love interest to the famous detective in one way or another. One of the most obvious examples would be Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes movies, in which Robert Downey Jr.'s detective is very obviously attracted to Rachel McAdams' Irene Adler. And while BBC's Sherlock does not portray them as a couple, it ends the episode featuring Irene Adler with the woman losing to the detective because she has fallen in love with him. Even one of the earliest adaptations, the 1899 play by William Gillette, which was written under creative advice of the creator Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself, plays with the relation between Holmes and the woman. In the play, the character of Alice Faulkner is modelled after Irene Adler and becomes Sherlock Holmes' romantic interest the detective even admits his love for at the end. So obviously, there has been a desire by creators to partner Holmes in a romantic way basically since the introduction of the character, and the most frequent love interest for the detective is Irene Adler, either directly by name or inspiration. What almost everyone, whether they adapt the Sherlock Holmes canon or only know it superficially, seems to forget, however, is the fact that there was no relationship whatsoever between Holmes and Adler. They're not interested in each other romantically in any way, they don't fall in love with each other, and at the end of the story, A Scandal in Bohemia, both are perfectly happy as they are. So let's take a closer look at what so many adaptations get wrong about Irene Adler and Sherlock Holmes. There is no denying that A Scandal in Bohemia, in almost all of its incarnations that have been created through many adaptations over the years, has always enjoyed a certain amount of significance. It is the story of Sherlock Holmes taking on the case of the King of Bohemia, who has had an affair with Irene Adler. Said opera singer is blackmailing the king with photographs shortly before the man's marriage, so it is up to Holmes to trick the woman and retrieve the photographs. However, it all culminates in a great defeat for the detective, who has been foiled by Irene Adler, who leaves England with the photographs and her new husband. In remembrance of Irene Adler, Holmes goes on to only ever refer to her as the woman, a title that obviously seems to bear great meaning. A Scandal in Bohemia has become known as one of the few stories in which Sherlock Holmes does not succeed, and even more so, it has gained popularity for the character of Irene Adler, the only woman to ever outsmart Holmes. Here lies the obvious fascinating relation between Holmes and Adler that almost every Sherlock Holmes artist likes to sink their teeth into. Irene Adler is arguably the most detailed female character in the entire canon, and any character who manages to defeat the great Sherlock Holmes must be automatically someone special. Irene Adler, in the original story, is a young American woman of not only outstanding attractiveness, but also character. Even Holmes remarks upon Irene's beauty, describing her as a lovely woman with a face that a man might die for. We are even treated to a demonstration of Irene's wits when she takes up a very Holmesian trick, namely disguise, in order to follow the detective and wish him a good night. She proves to be foresighted as well, leaving England before anyone can get to the photographs, and rightly assuming that Holmes would return to her home, so she leaves him a note explaining her course of action. The detective, after a moment of surprise, comes to acknowledge her intellectual character, telling the King of Bohemia coldly, "She seems indeed to be on a very different level to your majesty." With all those remarkable traits, it is very much understandable why the character of Irene Adler enjoys such an important role within and outside of the canon. As the only woman to ever outwit Holmes, she has quickly become the most significant woman in Holmes' life, for many people either reading or adapting the stories. Here, general norms and assumptions like to latch onto this popular story and force their views upon an otherwise neutral relationship. Sherlock Holmes is the male main character of the story. Irene Adler is the only woman to be of any great importance to a detective, so heteronormativity has found its way into the countless adaptations and created love and romance between those two characters. The remarkable nature of all the adaptations that play with this relationship becomes quite evident though as soon as you read A Scandal in Bohemia for yourself. Not only is Irene Adler almost never mentioned again after that story, it is also made quite clear from the very beginning that there are no romantic feelings between Sherlock Holmes and Irene Adler whatsoever. Adler in fact gets married to another man, and Holmes, who witnesses the marriage, goes happily on knowing that. The opening paragraph of A Scandal in Bohemia actually tells us everything the reader ought to know about Holmes's view on the woman and the nature of their relationship. Anyone who has thought of Holmes as being in love with Adler clearly seems to have ignored the very opening of the story, in which Watson flat out tells the reader it was not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Adler. After that, we are treated to another one of Watson's depictions regarding Holmes and emotions, especially love, establishing once again the detective bears no interest in any romantic affairs. However, it has to be said that Irene Adler does play a significant role for Holmes regarding the man's perception of women. You might wonder what sort of perception I'm talking about. Well, turns out the original Sherlock Holmes is a massive sexist. While it is worth remarking that the general behaviour towards the women in the canon does not, at least on the surface, seem different compared to Holmes's treatment of men, it has to be mentioned that the mindset behind those interactions are different. Despite Holmes being a bohemian man who is very much ahead of his time, he has all the appearance of a misogynist that is typical of a man of the Victorian era. There is an explicit mistrust he holds against women, a feeling he never straight up utters about men. The Sign of Four, the second ever published story and being the only story with a romantic subplot of sorts, is a perfect example of Holmes's prejudices. According to him, women are never to be entirely trusted, and he thinks of them as secretive and distrusting people, a notion which also comes up in A Scandal in Bohemia. This is where the significance of Irene Adler comes into play. It is the defeat through the woman that changes Holmes's view for the better. Since he has never been outsmarted by a woman, the detective comes to realize that he should not underestimate or discourage them. Thus, the story's function was to challenge Holmes's lower opinion of women and codify misogyny as undesirable. And as a reminder of that, Holmes even asks the King of Bohemia for Irene's photograph, turning Adler into this beacon of Holmes's new attitude. In the very last few lines of the story, Watson makes his observation of change, telling us that Holmes used to make merry over the cleverness of women, but I have not heard him do it as of late. So while there definitely are not any feelings of romantic nature between Sherlock Holmes and Irene Adler, she did leave a mark on his life and remains, in one way or another, the most significant woman in the detective's career. Hello guys, John here. Thanks for watching my first ever video essay. I love talking about Sherlock Holmes. He's one of my absolute favorite fictional characters, so I thought talking about him would make sense for my first ever video essay. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching it. You can definitely expect some more video essays coming up, definitely about Sherlock Holmes, but also about some other things. So until then, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done it already, and check out some of my other videos, and I'll see you guys next time.